This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so any questions for me, guys? Anyone, any questions for me? So we were talking about app service plans, app services. And yesterday we were also doing something called WinACP, and then we said we can install something called Visual Studio, which is a better way to go ahead and deploy your code. And that's where we are coming to a concept called zero downtime deployments, or something known as deployment slots in Azure App Service. Right. So what did you all read about this? What did you know about this one? Anyone, if someone wants to add something here. Yes. Let's take some input and then get started with the session. So the assignment that I've given you all was to go ahead and read about something called deployment slots. I'm not even asking you all to practice this out. I'm asking you all to read about what deployment slots really are. So yes, what do you mean by a deployment slot? What exactly this is, and what are the use cases of this one? Anyone who read this, read about it? Okay. Deployment slots. So which means that if you have an app service plan, you can have a main app service which is called as a production. So any environment or any application which is live is called as or is known as a production application out here. Apart from production, I can also go ahead create something called as a testing slot, staging slot, whatever it is that you call, meaning I will create something called as a slot out here within the same app service plan. This is the app service plan. Within the app service plan, I'll go ahead create a production slot, and I'll also go ahead and create something called as a staging slot or a testing slot or whatever, some name of the slot out here. Question here is that do I have an additional cost if I create a slot? Not really. It's the app service plan that you're charged for and not the app services that are running under it. It's just the plan that you're charged for. And again, very important, slot can only be created in standard, premium, or isolated tier. You cannot create an app service slot into something called as a free plan. There is no app service, let's say, slot concept in something called as a free plan. You need to upgrade your plan to something called as a standard in order to support that particular app service plan. And also we'll see about how do you upgrade your plan and all these things out. And this time around, same code from my local laptop. I have a Visual Studio installed on the local laptop out here. The same code, I will just deploy this not into the production, but into the slot out here. So that my code is there on the cloud, and this slot has its own URL. I'll test my code on that particular URL. I'll ask my developers to test this out. And then once the testing is done, I will do something called as a swap, meaning whatever code that is there in the slot will go into production and whatever code is there in the production will come into the slot out here. This is what is going to happen if or when I use something called as, let's say, deployment slots for something called as a zero downtime deployments. So let's check this out. Let's see how this really works out. So very firstly, what I'll do is come down into something called as the app service, and I'll go into something called as deployment slots in order to add something called as a deployment slot. Again, when I go to deployment slot, it's telling deployment slots are not available right now for a plan called F1 because I created my web application into a plan called F1 out here, and this is running. And if I just click on this one, again, this is a new web application that I created. So a default page, you'll have a default page out here that I get, and this is an F1 plan. And if I click on this one, it will get me to the app service plan page out here, and just scroll down. There is something called as scale up. meaning just go to the next plan out here. So I'll just click on scale up, and I will try to see which plan supports a deployment slot. Just scroll down. F1 is telling included hardware memory storage. D1 it's telling you also have something called custom domains. B1 there's something called scaling. B2, B3 nothing called about slots. Let's go into production. I have something called S1. Scroll down, seeing staging slots, up to 5 slots to use for testing and deploying before, let's say, swapping and all that stuff. It's telling okay fine, you can use up to 5 slots, test and deploy it before you swap your code into production. I'll say this is the one that I need. I'll say apply this out. So I am scaling my app service up, or I'm scaling my app service plan up to something called S1, which will end up costing me around 3,155 rupees per month. This is the cost that I'll incur if I go to this particular plan out here. And as and when I do that, I now have the plan on S1 colon 1. We'll talk about what this colon 1 and all that stuff is. So what I did is I came into my plan. I said scale up. Scale up means you're moving from F1 to S1 or whatever plan is. Scale down is the opposite side of it. You're coming down to that particular plan, and it takes around a minute or so to scale your plan up. That's it, a minute or so on something like that. After this, let me come down to my app service back again. So I'll just go back one level. I'm into my app service. I'll go into what the deployment slots right now. And as and when I go into the deployment slots, it's telling I have one slot, and here I have the slot called what? Production. It's telling the slot that I've given you is called as a production out here. Good enough. I'll say okay, fine. Add one slot. I'll say add a slot, and I'll say the name of the slot is name of the slot is something known as a testing slot out here, or a test slot, or whatever it is. If you want to, let's say, name it in a very good way, you can say staging or something like this, stage, production, whatever that you call. In my case, I'll say it is testing. And as and when I do testing, do you see what is there in the bottom? You now have a URL telling it is dev web app abcxyz000 which is your app service name hyphen testing dot azure websites dot net. So you have this particular, let's say, name of the app service plus a hyphen testing added to it, because the name of the slot is testing. So whatever name of the slot you add, say it is stage, testing slot, whatever it is, the name of the app service will be added with that particular slot name out here dot azure websites dot net out here, which is the fully qualified domain name of your slot. So I'll now go ahead and I'll say add this out. So I'm now going ahead and adding something called as a testing slot out here. Again, it'll take like a minute or so for the testing slot to be added. So once that's done, we'll see how it really looks like out here. So this is the production. I changed my plan to S1 so that it supports the addition of slots. And once that's done, I'm now going ahead and adding this out. Let's say successfully done. And now this is running. I now have a testing slot. So if I go back into my resource group right now, earlier I had a plan and then the app service. Just refresh this out a couple of times. Okay, let me give it a couple of times refresh. Let me refresh my browser sometimes. And now I have what? If you see this, I have an app service plan. I have an app service. I also have what? App service slot, which goes by the name testing, which also has its own URL, which is something like https dev hyphen testing dot azure websites dot net. So I now have something called testing out here with the name called hyphen testing out here, and I have all these things out. Now what I'll do, again, go back into my Visual Studio. and now I'm trying to, let's say, redeploy my code. And this is the code that I have written yesterday. I'll just open this out. Which is something like Devops 8 a.m. and all that stuff. I'll just open this out here. And this says it is version 2. I'll say, okay, fine, this is good enough. I'll go ahead. I'll do a build initially. It says build is successful. This is done. I'll again click on this, say publish. And this time around, I'll go for a new publishing target. I'll say new. I'll say publish to Azure, Azure App Service, Windows. After that, this is resource group inside which I have the dev web app and all these things out. But I don't want to deploy my code directly on the dev web app. I want to deploy the code on a slot of a dev web app. So what I'll do is just beside this particular dev web app, you have this one, a small arrow out here. Just click on that. I have something called what? Deployment slots. Say that I have what? The testing slot that I created. I'll target this for the code deployment. I'll say finish. And I'll edit this release. And I'll just go ahead and say remove additional files at the destination. This is something that I'm just doing for the sanity. And I'll publish this out. So it's now doing the build and now publishing it out. And the publish is now happening on the deployment slot and not the actual web app. Your actual web app is not disturbed at all. Users are using that particular web app. Users are, let's say, good with that web app, or everything is, let's say, working fine. Now you're taking the entire code and deploying it into a slot called as a, let's say, a deployment slot out here called testing. This is something that you're deploying. And now if you see, it is adding this directory and etc. into the testing slot. It's not adding it directly into the main, let's say, application. It's now adding into the testing slot. It's restarting whatever it can happen, not a problem. It can restart, it can do whatever it is. And it says the publishing was successful and etc. It's saying it's installing a couple of extensions. That's good enough. Restarting the web app. Once the web app is restarted, let's see what we can do with this. Again, the application is restarted, and this is the URL of the testing slot, not the main application. And here in the testing slot, I have a code with the version called what? Version 2. And in my main application, which is production, this is the URL that I will expose to my users. This is the URL that I'll go ahead and expose to my users out here. And if I click on this one, this still has the old content. Think your content is running and all that stuff. Now, this URL is something that I'll go ahead and give it to my internal users. You as an internal user, you as a tester, you as a developer, I'll go ahead and give this to you. Test it out completely. We'll say, okay, fine, test this out completely, see how is it working and all that stuff. Once you are satisfied, meaning once we know that this code is say running good, running well and all that stuff, I'll come back into my deployment slots and I'll perform something called as a swap operation. Swap is nothing but whatever code is there inside production. Let's clear this off. Let's take that sketcher again. Whatever is there or whatever code is there inside production is moved to the testing slot, and whatever code is there in the testing slot is moved into the production. So let's go there and let's hit the swap button here. And once I hit the swap, it's asking me what is your source, what is your destination. It can be anything. Source can be, let's say, something like this. I can change this.
One question.
Good, please.
What if there are like one production and five testing slots? What will you select?
What if there are one production, five testing? It just depends upon which slot that you want to deploy your code on. So it
Okay.
just
I
depends
mean,
upon which slot I deploy
we,
the code on.
I mean, we can select, right? It's not like it will swap everything. We can select
No, we
which
can select.
slot and okay, okay,
Yes, if you see this, the target here, you can change the slot to multiple things out here. You can change your source, you can change your destination out here. The target here is production. The source can be changed. In my case, I only have one source. I can change from testing 1, testing 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. Yes, any more questions here? So I'll hit the swap button here, and swap is just going to do this. It's going to take the code, everything that is there in your testing, pull it to production. Whatever is there in production, push it to the testing on that. So swap is nothing but just swapping things around. Again, the swap will take around 1 minute or so, 1 or 2 minutes. And even in that 1 or 2 minutes, the application will still be up and running. There is no downtime. There is no downtime out here. That's the reason we go for deployment slots out here. And this is the documentation for deployment slots on what do you mean by slot and what are the limitations of a slot, and all these things are specific customer and all these things out. And yes, what is the limitation of a slot and all these things out here and such. Again, automate with PowerShell. You can also go ahead, take a PowerShell out here. You can create a slot out here telling new app AZ web app slot. You can go ahead, give the name of your slot, give the app service plan, and etc. And you can also change this using a PowerShell. You can also invoke a swap using a PowerShell script out here. Same thing, you can do it with ARM template also. ARM template also supports swap. So if you look at the documentation, they have given a holistic view of how do you go ahead and let's say do it with ARM templates. How do you add something called as slots? And in this case, it's called what? Microsoft.web/sites/slots out here. So you can do slots out here, and I can also do same thing with Azure CLI, command line interface. You can also do that as such with with let's say the CLI also. And if I come back, now it says successfully completed the swap between testing and production. So let me go into this one. This is the testing. And what do you think should be here if I refresh the HTML page, the simple HTML page out here? I have the simple HTML page. This was the code that was there in my production slot. And in my production, this is my production right now. I have now the version 2. Again, as a developer, I will go ahead and I will also go ahead and develop version 3 of my code. Again, it'll take let's say it'll take good amount of time to go ahead and let's say increment this particular version. Let's say I put it to version 3. Save this out. Again, it'll take a lot of time to let's say do this version 3 out here. I added multiple things, deleted multiple things out here. After that, I just go ahead, click on this one, say publish, and say new. Again, since build is a part of publish, I'm directly hitting the publish, so it will automatically build this internally. I'll say Azure, next, next. Same thing out here. I'll say dev, deployment slots. I will deploy this onto the testing. Version 3 is being deployed on testing right now. Again, I'll remove the files, additional destination, all that stuff. So, and I'll publish this out. So now your production is running the version 2, and I as a user, I am going ahead and deploying version 3 in the testing slot. So whatever new version is coming in, I'm deploying it inside this particular testing slot out here. And once the version is deployed here, let's see that. Again, it will take some time to go ahead and let's say deploy this out. And it's still running. So let's give it a minute. And once the deployment is done, again, you are not really deploying on a live application. So your users do not even know that deployment is actually happening. It is your company who's deploying it. And once the deployment is done, again, it'll take some time to let's say refresh this out and all these things. So once I refresh this particular screen, let's check what is there in my testing slot out here. And the testing slot, what I have, version 3. You as a user are still using the version 2. This is something, this is the URL that I've given to the entire world. I haven't even given this URL to anyone. This is just for my internal purpose, internal testing and all these things out. So this is something that I'm testing out, and version 3 is in testing slot right now. And once I test it, once I say that okay fine, this is good enough, I'll again do a swap. Yes, does anyone have a question? If not, can you please go on mute?
Yes, yes. I mean, one question. And
Go please.
testing slots are managed by us or like developers?
No, these are managed by us. Now,
Okay.
whatever you see on an infrastructure level, this is
Mm-hmm.
completely us. As a DevOps
Okay.
engineer, we are managing all these things out. Or as an
Okay.
administrator, we are managing this out. It's an administrator
Okay.
or a DevOps role.
Okay.
So as a developer, the developers are not even expected to understand the concept of slots and all these things out. They might not even know that there is something called slot and all these things out here.
Then how would they know like they're doing testing or something like that? I mean, I'm just asking
We
because
provide the
they,
URL. The
okay,
URL,
only they,
you only need a URL. That's it, right? To
okay,
test
okay.
this
You
out.
give them test URL
Yes,
and they put it in the, I mean,
exactly.
publish and build and then, okay, I
Correct.
understood. Yeah.
So we just give the test URLs to this particular developers. That's it. So as in like developers can have the knowledge, but they're not expected to have this particular knowledge out here from an infrastructure perspective. All right. So I'll just do a swap
But
right now.
sir, in mobile
Hmm?
application also is the same process.
I'm sorry. Can you come again, please?
In mobile application also same process, the
Yes. Even
deployment
for a
process.
mobile application, yes, it's the same process. Again, though it's a mobile, though it is this one, it's just the platform where it is hosted in, where the code is actually coming from. So even for a mobile APIs or even for the mobile applications, we implement the same process. We can implement the same process out here.
We can download the app in mobile, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So I now have two things. One is the testing, and testing is running version 3. The main is running version 2. My developers have tested this out, everything is good enough, and I then perform the swap once again. So I'm again performing the swap, and this time around, the version 3 that is there in the testing slot moves to the production slot, and the version 2 that is there in production slot is pulled into the testing slot. This is the swap that's happening right now, which means that if version 3 is not successful in production, yes, you might get some issues. Users can complain that, you know what, I mean, it's not the same for every user. Users can complain that this particular functionality is not working, or let's say a functionality is not, or let's say a functionality A or a B is not working out here. If this happens, I can now do a rollback, meaning I know that all my code is in version, all my, let's say, version 2 code, which was working fine, is now is in a, let's say, a testing slot, and version 3 is the new code that got deployed into production. All I can do is a rollback to get version 2 back again and version 3 back here, test it again, understand what is the issue, fix it, and again do a swap out here. I can do multiple swaps, no cost that is associated with the swap out here. So if you now see this one, swap is done. So this is testing, and if I refresh testing, I have what? Version 2, and if I refresh the production, I have what? The version 3. Version 2 is still hold or is still held in, let's say, the testing out here, and version 3 is still there or it's still in, let's say, production out here. In case you have an issue, you again come here, just do a swap. This time this swap action is called rollback. Whenever you are, let's say, going down, it's called a rollback. If you're going up from one version to the other, it's called as an upgrade. Upgrades or updates and rollbacks are possible using the concept of slots out here. Yes, anyone, any questions still here that I can take? It just depends upon what are we really testing out here. Again, there is no hard and fast rule that you have to have one slot or two slot and etc. The plan that you have supports 5 slots. A maximum of 5 slots is what the plan really supports out here. A maximum of 5 slots is what the plan really supports out here. But you can have any number of slots. It just depends upon what is your use case, how many versions that you want to hold, how many versions that you want to test at a given point in time. Yes, any more questions here? Anyone, any questions here?
Hello. So we given in a web application form, right? For
Mm-hmm.
testing,
Mm-hmm.
how to test the code is good or bad by using Sonar Cloud, right?
Can you come again, please? How do you test the code? Can you come again, please, with your question?
We given by it is a web application for testing.
Mm-hmm.
In code error, how to fix that?
Code error, how to fix that? Again,
Yeah.
if you are a developer, then I would have told what are all the tools to fix that particular code errors and all these things out. As a DevOps engineer or as an administrator, we do not really need to know that, because if I need to tell you what are the code errors and etc., we need to understand what are the methods that are implemented in the code, what are classes in a code, what is a startup file and all that stuff. We need to understand which file is actually causing the error, what method is causing the error and all that stuff, and then fix that. But as a DevOps engineer, we really do not know that, or we really do not need to know that, telling how to fix the code error and etc. This is the responsibility of a developer. Does it
Okay.
answer your question?
Sir,
Mhm.
the developer will know the code is right, good or bad after production, right?
Not really. It can be also identified in the testing slot also. Like in a testing slot, once you deploy your code, you can also get an idea whether your code is good or bad. Like once you put the code inside the testing slot, this can also, let's say,
Okay.
give you a very good idea whether the code is good or bad. Sometimes it might not be caught here. It might be caught in production. It just depends upon where you're catching it. So 90% of the issues are caught here in the testing slot only, telling that all these issues are, let's say, fixed and all that stuff. There will be still some issues which are out of your hands, still some scenarios that you haven't tested, which can be caught in production, which will be addressed, let's say, in the later versions, or let's say if this is really important, you can address it in the same version as such out here as such.